So we are going to talk about Howard Schultz's CNN town hall, but before we do that, I just want to take a moment to really reflect on just how damaging this is in the first place, because this is nothing more than a ratings grab for CNN. They're doing this because Howard Schultz is a very polarizing figure. People either love him or hate him, mostly they hate him, but nonetheless, this is something that we're all going to tune into and watch. But what they're doing here is incredibly damaging to political discourse because they are propping up his candidacy, either wittingly or unwittingly, because the mainstream media is an incredibly powerful force. It's an influencer in American politics, and they can take a candidate who is a joke and turn that candidate into a credible, viable candidate. And they did this with Donald Trump, because if you all recall, when he initially announced that he was running for president back in 2015, he really was a joke. He literally had to pay people $50 each to hold up signs with his name on it. But with time, the media ended up giving him $2 billion worth of what was essentially free advertising, and they ended up inadvertently legitimizing his candidacy. Now, this is not surprising because political scientists have long documented the impact media has on politics. And if you've taken any upper division political science course, then chances are you've read from political scientists Shanto Iyengar and Donald Kinder, who have published numerous studies that demonstrate just how powerful the mainstream media is. Not only is it able to set the national agenda and therefore influence American political discourse in a really substantial way, but they also have the ability to prime people and to get you to think about things without actually mentioning it explicitly. Furthermore, they actually have the ability to either increase or decrease the salience of political issues. That is, they can get us to care more or less about issues regardless of how objectively important they are. Now, what they can also do is they can legitimize a candidate by giving that individual a lot of coverage, Donald Trump, or they can essentially kill off campaigns and make them less viable simply by ignoring them. So they have a lot of power, and who they choose to cover and not cover really is something that we should all be looking at. So the fact that they are covering Howard Schultz, not just in mentioning him, but dedicating literally an hour of primetime coverage when most eyeballs will be towards the screen, that demonstrates that they clearly haven't learned their lesson. Because even though they gave Donald Trump nonstop negative coverage, well, that coverage still communicated to people that he was a serious political contender in the 2016 presidential race. And they're doing it again with someone who's clearly a joke. Howard Schultz is the joke of the 2020 election cycle. He's vacuous. He doesn't have any real policy prescriptions. He's just an angry billionaire that doesn't want progressives to get elected because he's worried that his taxes will be raised. But nonetheless, they are dedicating an hour to him, which I cannot tell you how damaging that is. And furthermore, when you think about how they're ignoring other candidates who are actually viable and serious contenders like Tulsi Gabbard and Elizabeth Warren, well, I mean, it's very clear that this town hall should have never taken place. They should not have given him a town hall in the first place. But nonetheless, since they did, I'm going to try to undo the damage that they did in showing you that this guy is not a viable candidate. He's a fucking joke. And I don't really have to do very much because it's very clear that when he speaks, he not only doesn't know what he's talking about, but he isn't really driven by anything that would help the American people. There's nothing that he's putting at the center of his policy platform. He's just an empty suit who wants to prop himself up and who's running clearly for self-aggrandizing reasons. So to show you just how much of a joke Howard Schultz is, he was asked about the Green New Deal, which, as you all know, is actually important because the IPCC just gave us 12 years to act on climate change in order to avert catastrophic levels of climate change. How does he respond to the Green New Deal? By calling it immoral, for the dumbest reason imaginable. Take a look.
When I read the Green New Deal, and I try and understand what they're suggesting, I don't understand how you're going to give a job for everybody, how you're going to give free college to everybody, how you're going to create clean energy throughout the country in every building of the land, and then tally this thing up with $32 trillion on Medicare for all. That's about $40 trillion plus. We are sitting, ladies and gentlemen, with $22 trillion of debt on the balance sheet of America. So once again, not that I'm a business person or I'm an economist, and maybe an economist would disagree with me, but I think it's immoral to suggest that we can tally up 20, 30, 40, $50 trillion of debt to solve a problem that could be solved in a different way.
So the Green New Deal, which is a collection of policy proposals that would save the planet potentially, is immoral specifically because it would increase our national debt. However, the alternative, which is to do nothing, that's not immoral to Howard Schultz. Allowing the planet to become uninhabitable, that's not immoral, but increasing the national debt is. So we have this environmental issue that existentially threatens human beings. He's more concerned with the debt.
Amazing.
Now he says that the Green New Deal is too ambitious. Okay, if it's so ambitious that, we're not going to be able to achieve it and it's just unfeasible, then what's your plan? That's right, he doesn't actually have a plan. Now, is the Green New Deal ambitious? Absolutely, but it's ambitious and it's designed to be ambitious because it's meant to accommodate the 12-year timeline that the IPCC gave us. See, the climate isn't looking out for what's politically feasible. It's changing rapidly regardless if we do something or not. So what the Green New Deal tries to do is transition us to clean, renewable energy within the timeline that will allow us to avert catastrophic levels of climate change. Howard Schultz is old. He's going to die long before a lot of the main really problematic consequences of climate change come to fruition. We're talking about seeing Florida underwater. We're talking about wars over water in the Middle East. He doesn't care, though. This is how much of a joke Howard Schultz is. Now, getting to taxes, we all know that he got in this race, or is contemplating getting in this race, rather, because he doesn't want his taxes to be raised, and the idea of this 70% marginal tax rate on income over $10 million, that's something that he deemed highly undesirable, even punitive. So far, he seems to be the candidate who is trying to pander to the small class of billionaires who don't want their taxes raised. But in spite of all of the crying and whining he's done, speaking out against taxes and a 70% marginal tax rate, he did declare this at the town hall.
I should be paying more taxes.
That was probably the smartest thing I've ever heard Howard Schultz say. But then he goes on this 2-minute long rant about how he's also against the Republican Party's tax plan. So we know that he's against the 70% marginal tax rate above income exceeding $10 million proposed by AOC, but he's also against the Republican Party's tax plan. So we know that his plan is going to be somewhere between tax cuts for the rich and a 70% marginal rate. Okay, so what's your plan? What's your actual plan? He was asked this, and this is the answer he gave.
Are you talking about you should pay 2% higher? 10% higher, 20% higher federal income tax?
Poppy, I don't know what the number is. I think what I'm saying is we need comprehensive tax reform.
Ballpark it for people, because it makes a difference. Would it go up to, the rate under President Clinton, or are we talking about significantly higher?
What I think is what being proposed at 70% is a punitive number. And I think there are better ways to do this.
So what's not punitive?
I don't know what the number is, but what I'm suggesting is I should be paying higher taxes.
Oh, how convenient. You don't have the specific numbers. So he thinks that AOC is too hard on billionaires, but Donald Trump is too soft on billionaires. But yet, he doesn't have a plan of his own. He just knows that he doesn't like the plans that are being proposed by other individuals. Howard, if you want to run for president, then you actually have to think about these things. You have to be serious about policymaking. But he hasn't thought about policymaking. It's almost as if he is a vacuous human being who's only interested in running to promote his book and for self-aggrandizing reasons. As I stated before, but it's worth restating because it's painfully obvious. Now, he doesn't have a plan when it comes to taxes. So what about healthcare? We all know that he hates Medicare for all. He called it un-American. So when he was asked about what his healthcare plan will be, again, he talks about what he doesn't like about, the Republicans and what they're proposing and what the supposed far left is proposing in Medicare for all, but yet he can't articulate what his plan would be.
What is your plan to improve our healthcare system?
Again, thank you for the question, and I think this gives me another opportunity to talk about the extreme left and the extreme right. And so we have a healthcare crisis in the country on many levels, not the least of which is the opioid crisis. But the Republicans, for 10 years, 8 years during the Obama presidency and the last 2 years, have done everything possible to eradicate the Affordable Care Act. And they've done that without offering any plan. This is the far right. The far left is now suggesting Medicare for all. That is a $32 trillion number. And just like the issue I brought up before about making all the buildings in America energy free in terms of clean energy, does anyone here really understand that Medicare for all also means that you will lose the choice of your doctor and your private insurance company? Not many people know that. So that would disrupt the entire system, and it'll cost $32 trillion.
Okay, we've got to pause there because he says that Medicare for all would cost $32 trillion. Wrong. If you're going to talk numbers, then get it right. Our current healthcare system costs $59 trillion over 10 years. If we move to Medicare for all, overall, that would cost $57 trillion. In other words, that would save the American people $2 trillion overall. So if you're actually going to talk numbers and pretend as if you know what you're talking about, get the numbers right, Howard. Second of all, he says, quote, you'd lose your choice of your doctor and your private insurance company. This is also wrong, and it shows how out of touch he is. Currently, with our private, for-profit healthcare system, you have limitations on who you can see. You have to choose a doctor that's in your network, and you're also limited to what types of specialists your insurance company will pay for. And when it comes to losing your insurance, this is just one of the dumbest things I think I've ever heard anyone say when talking about Medicare for all, because Americans hate dealing with insurance companies. He doesn't realize this. We hate the paperwork, and most importantly, we hate paying that monthly premium only to find out we have to pay even more money for copays and deductibles if we even try to see a doctor. So you're not going to be able to obfuscate here, Howard, because Americans actually have firsthand experience in dealing with this. Hence why Medicare for all has 70% support among the American population, and now is supported by a majority of Republicans. But remember, the original question that he was asked was, what's your plan? He never answered that question. He just talked about plans he doesn't like. So he was given another chance to explain what his plan was.
So, Mr. Schultz, to that question, and because your question, Rio, was about what's your plan, and many, I think, wonder, is it fair to criticize the left and the right? What is your plan to make sure that if it's not Medicare for all, what is your plan to make sure that every American can get quality, affordable health care?
First and foremost, three principles. One, I think everyone in America, every person deserves to have the right for affordable care. Every person. Second, there needs to be competition in the system. And what I mean by that is competition so that the American people can get access to prescription drugs at lower prices, because right now the government is not allowed under a federal law to negotiate with pharma. The third thing is that it has been tested but not proven yet about interstate commerce among insurance companies. But there's no doubt that, once again, the healthcare crisis has been with us for a long time. The other issue is I stand by the fact that I supported the Affordable Care Act. It covered 20 million people who did not have good insurance, but premiums have gone up double since the Affordable Care Act. So now we got to go back in and fix the Affordable Care Act and bring premiums down. Competition will do that.
So again, he was droning on and basically describing what was Obamacare for the most part, vaguely speaking at least. And finally, the host chimed in to give him another opportunity to actually lay out a specific plan, because what he described was not a real plan. It was just platitudes. It was Obamacare-esque platitudes. So she chimed in, gave him another chance to explain himself, and she ended up scaring the shit out of him.
But the far right remove the...
How? The question is how. I don't mean to startle you from the back. The voice over your shoulder over here. But how specifically?
That was my favorite part of the entire debate. Now, we're just going to stop there when it comes to healthcare. he just gives more of the same. He doesn't know how to be concise in any of his responses. He just drones on and he's not saying anything. He talks about things that he doesn't know about, so he has to essentially filibuster and pivot to what he doesn't like about other people's plans. Again, Howard, you're running to be the president of the United States. You can't just say, I don't like this, I don't like that. You have to construct policy yourself, but he hasn't thought too deeply about any of this because he's an imbecile. He doesn't know about any of this. So moving on, for those of you, maybe the 3 people left in the country who actually think that he's not out of touch still, then I think that this next clip should convince you because he literally parroted what was a satirical line from Colbert. So this is what Colbert said before when talking about race.
I don't even see race, not even my own.
That was a funny joke that poked fun at people with white privilege who tried to pretend as if they're colorblind when really demonstrating how out of touch they are when it comes to issues related to race. Now keep that in mind when you hear him talk about race in this next clip.
As somebody who grew up in a very diverse background as a young boy in the projects, I didn't see color as a young boy, and I honestly don't see color now.
Wrong answer. Now, why is that wrong? Well, as Mark Lamont Hill points out on Twitter, he says, please stop saying I don't see color as a means of proving you're not racist. The failure to recognize racial differences keeps whiteness positioned as the norm and reinforces racism. It sends the message that you can only see my humanity because you can't see my blackness. And he's 100% right there, but it shows, in giving that answer, Howard Schultz hasn't thought about this. He hasn't spoken to any black leaders. He hasn't tried to reach out to the community and talk to people from the community. He's just a billionaire who, again, got in the race because he doesn't want his taxes raised. His only constituency is rich people, or people of wealth, because it seems as if saying billionaire is a controversial term, according to Howard Schultz.
The moniker billionaire now has become the catchphrase. I would rephrase that, and I would say that people of means have been able to leverage their wealth.
But getting to the question we all want answered, whether or not he'd still run knowing that he would be a spoiler potentially and hand Donald Trump a second term easily. This is his non-answer.
Yes or no? Is there any world in which you run as a Democrat?
No.
Okay, there you go.
No, I didn't even have to think about that.
Okay.
No, and I have nothing against the Democratic Party. It just, I don't feel represented.
To that point, you have said, and you just repeated it, that you promise that you will not be a spoiler, that you will not run, that you will not continue running if it would mean a second term for President Trump.
Okay.
If you run, Mr. Schultz, and if you look at the polls in the fall of 2020, and it looks like you are going to be a spoiler, like you will get President Trump reelected, will you drop out of the race?
Okay, a very important question, so let's clarify this right now, right here, on national TV on CNN. First off, the issue of being a spoiler, how can you spoil a system that is already broken? It's just not working. So it's not the right word. Now, what I've said publicly, and I want to repeat, if the math doesn't tally up when I get to the next 3 or 4 months and I take my message out to the American people and I continue to talk this way about how concerned I am about the country and how much I think we can do so much better under a different process, if the numbers don't add up, I will not run for president because I will not do anything whatsoever to re-elect Donald Trump. But no one wants to see him fired more than me.
Mr. Schultz, the fall of 2020 is what I was asking about. If you do run and the numbers don't add up your way and it looks like it would mean a second term for the president, would you commit to dropping out?
What I've just said is I am not going to run for president if it looks in any way, shape, or form.
But look at 2016, things change.
Yeah, well, they do change. But at this point right now, I'm asking a different question.
In other words, no. If his campaign doesn't gain any steam, then, sure, he's not going to run. But in the event he's already running and polls then determine that he would, in fact, be a spoiler, then no, he's not going to drop out because he already spent the time to campaign, so why drop out? So this is a selfish billionaire who is literally contemplating jumping in the race in the event someone on the so-called far left, like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, or Tulsi Gabbard, get the Democratic Party nomination. What a disgusting person. And he said that using the word spoiler is not the right terminology because, quote, how can you spoil a system that's already broken? Now, when he says this, it's technically true. We all think that the system is broken, but you need to look at this from the context of a billionaire saying it. In his view, the reason why the system is broken is due to rising extremism on both sides of the political spectrum. So if a supposedly far-left candidate like Bernie Sanders becomes the Democratic Party nominee, there's nothing really to spoil because Americans won't be happy with that outcome either way. Except the reason why people think the system is broken, Howard, is specifically because of people like you. It's because of the influence billionaires have on our elections. It's because of money in politics, because average people are not being represented. But then he says, I'm not being represented by the Democratic Party. Oh, boo-hoo. Poor billionaire isn't being represented. Howard, you don't need representation. You are a billionaire. You have as much wealth as small countries. You can be perfectly self-sufficient, never having anyone in Congress that represents your ideology. But he's wrong here. The Democratic Party does look out for billionaires. He's wrong. Absolutely, he is represented by not just the Democratic Party, but the Republican Party as well. They just gave you a tax cut. So how can you not feel represented, Howard? It's just that this is someone who is selfish. He's only thinking about himself. And this is exactly why pretty much everyone hates him and every single tweet he posts gets ratioed. So overall, what this town hall demonstrated is that he's out of touch, he lacks charisma, he has no cohesive message or vision for America, and he's absolutely not a serious candidate. Which is why, again, I want to get back to the original point that I made. CNN and mainstream media is going to fuck up and make him a credible candidate by covering him. They did it with Donald Trump, who is not just dim-witted, but was not a serious candidate, who had no real grassroots support to begin with. And they're possibly going to do it again with Howard Schultz. And why? Because they don't necessarily care about American political discourse, nor do they care about informing you about this person's policies, because he has no policies. This was a ratings grab. They know that you're going to tune in and see Howard Schultz. They know that people are going to be drawn to this, regardless if they love or hate Howard Schultz. And they did it because they want to make money.
Mike is a total loser, so don't hit the subscribe button, okay? And whatever you do, folks, do not hit the notification bell either. Mike treats me so unfairly.